In those days, the crest was in service to Steward Captain Auxilia of the Drift. Blood has been spilt in the streets of Heartvale, and in the very heart of our base of operations. I have added the names of the dead to the annals. The attacks were perpetrated by the Fellswords, a mercenary company of some repute that hails from Ultima. The name is familiar to me, as we fought on the same side in an Othralan royal succession during my first year with the company. I didn't mingle with them at the time, but the captain and Iron Gull remember them clearly. The captain speaks well of their leadership, while Iron Gull praises the tenacity of their soldiers in battle. Thus is the way of mercenary companies, fighting side by side in one war and against each other in the next. Our true enemy is the Vidala family, and whoever is backing them. We still do not know their goal, but they have bloodied our nose. The crest will not suffer that quietly. The captain has a plan. We need to get a member of the Vidala family, and to do that, we're going to hit their supply chains and businesses hard. We are going to make them hurt, and if they wish to keep their businesses afloat, they will have to act, and in so doing, they will reveal themselves. Then, we will strike. These Vidala and whoever is backing them are going to learn that the crest is not to be trifled with. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. On this week's episode, Benn is tasked with getting his hands on the man who runs the Vidala shop on the Red Steps. Find out what happens on episode 10, All About Alfus. It has been a few days since the attacks on the crest in Heartvale. The members of the company have been licking their wounds and recovering, and the officers have been planning and plotting their revenge on the perpetrators of these attacks. And over the course of the next few days, assignments begin to be handed out to the various squads within the crest. Iron Gull is busy passing out assignment after assignment, breaking the members of the crest into squads and sending them out into the streets to deliver mayhem to the Vidala family and their businesses. During this whole time, Benn watches as his fellow crest are sent out in groups of 4, 5, 6, and he is never assigned a task. On the 5th day after the attack, Benn is at the crow's nest, waiting yet again to receive an assignment, when Iron Gull approaches him. Benn stands and offers the old sergeant a salute, which Iron Gull waves away and sits down at the table. He gestures for Benn to join him, and Iron Gull says, "How you feeling, kid? You got pretty beat up in that fight." Benn nods and says, "Yes, thank you for asking, Sergeant, but I am all right. I am more than capable of partaking in these missions." "I'm glad to hear that, because I've got a specific mission in mind for you." Benn leans forward and says, "I am ready to do anything, Sergeant." "Very good. I have a very delicate and specific task for you, Benn. You've proven that you can work well on your own, and this task is going to require you to think on your own and act on your own. I want you to go after the business manager who runs the Vidala shop on the Red Steps. Alfus, I want you to abduct him. I want you to sequester him away, and I want you to get whatever information you can out of him. Benn, hearing that, nods and says, I see. And when I'm done getting information from him? When you're done with him, take him to the Broken Shield. I will have an agent waiting there, and they will take him off your hands. At that point, we'll have the next step ready to go. Our plan here, Benn, is to deprive the Vidala of all the resources they have to manage their businesses in secret, so that at least one of them is going to have to pop their head up, and then we'll take them. Benn nods and says, that seems very reasonable, Sergeant. Do you have any information on this Alfus? And Iron Gull says, we know that he works every day at the shop in the Red Steps. He's almost always there and only ever leaves on his way home. That will be when you can take him. Gather whatever information you need, formulate a plan, and execute it. Am I understood? Benn nods and says, I understand, Sergeant. Very good. Be on your way. So, Benn is going to start on this new mission. And before we do that, let's go ahead and do our starting mission moves. So we're going to roll our patron move. This is going to be plus steady because of Benn's playbook as a Black Hood. So we're going to roll 2d6 and add +2, and this is going to determine where Iron Gull's stance is with Benn. 8 + 2 is 10, and on a 10+, your patron is happy with you. You and the player of your patron should work out why this is. You may remove 1 disobedience if you have any. So Benn doesn't have any disobedience at this moment. He has, I think, pleased Iron Gull by the way that he stood against the fell swords that attacked the crow's nest, and that he stood and fought against them. So that is why he's being trusted with this special mission. Now, our other starting point here is that we are going to select 2 stats as our highlighted stats. And I think because we are looking at the possibility of getting into some fighting, that would be fierce. Steady is always a good one because it's facing duress. Wily is going to be persuading with leverage, or sly is study a situation or study a person. So there's a bunch of different ways that we could take this. So I think I'm going to do wily because I think that's going to be important for his interrogation of this person. And then I'm going to do fierce as well because I think it's possible that he's going to end up having to fight. There are probably some guards following this Alfus, but we don't know that yet. We're going to have to figure that out as we go through our scenes. So we have selected our highlighted stats, and then as far as an entanglement goes, it's either killing someone or spreading rumors about your deeds to increase your reputation, or steal something valuable or important from someone powerful. Once again, I think that's the one that makes sense. This could apply to this Alfus. It could also apply to something else that Benn comes across on this mission. I think we'll just wait and see what feels right as we get into it. Normally, I would say I would reset my chaos factor to 5 in order to start this scene. But I think because this is coming in response to this attack on the crest, I'm actually going to increase the chaos factor to 7 because the chaos factor in the previous scene was 6. And I think this represents the escalation of things in the city as this fight has taken place, as they are beginning to come up against more resistance. There is just more chaotic things that are going on and the potential for more chaos in this activity. So our first scene is going to be spend time on the red steps observing Alfus movements. This way Ben can get an idea of what's going on and where best to lay a trap. So we are going to go ahead and roll our D10 and see how our setup plays out. So again, our chaos factor is 7. And I rolled an 8, so that is above the chaos factor, which means that this scene plays out as expected. So Ben goes to the red steps in mid-afternoon. He's not wearing any sort of distinguishing marks. He's hidden away his crest badge so that no one can easily match him as a member of the crest. And he spends time observing from various vantage points the Vidala shop. Now, they are, as we've established, a merchant family. They bring in goods from all over and sell those goods from, I think, several shops. Their main one is here on the red steps in this district of Heartvale. As Ben is observing this, what does he see? We can go ahead and roll on the fate chart. And let's see, does he see any interesting activity going in and out of the Vidala shop during the day? I think it is 50-50. So chaos rank of 7, 50-50. Here we go. We got 60 even, which is a yes. Yes, he does. He sees some interesting activity happening. And for this, I'm defining interesting activity as not just like, oh, there are people going in and out of the shop. No, this is something that catches Ben's attention specifically, that he fixates on, that is hopefully going to help him in this task. So I'm just going to go ahead and roll on action and subject to see if that triggers any sort of ideas for what this interesting thing might be. So we got 57, create, and 5, create inside. So I think what we see is a cart pull up to the base of the red steps. And the way that I'm picturing this is the red steps are this plateau of stonework that rise up over the rest of this district. And like there are buildings that are not on the red steps, and there are streets and everything that go around it. And then these red steps are the sort of focal marketplace of the city of Heartvale. And because it is on this plateau, there are probably established shops that are ringing around the outside of the stonework. And I think there are probably places where carts can roll up and then unload cargo. And there are probably these pulley systems that can lift that cargo up to the red steps proper so that they can then be transported to whatever shop they need to be. Now, this poses an interesting question, which is the Vidala shop on the edge of this where it is, sort of overlooking the rest of the city and it would be easier to bring up stuff? Or is the shop more towards the interior of the red steps and therefore has to be like this cargo has to be transported to it? So I'm going to say it's 50-50. I'm just going to ask the fate chart. Is it on the edge? 52. Yes, it is. So Benn, from his vantage point, sees this cart roll up. He sees a couple of fell swords jump out of the cart. They begin unloading boxes onto the elevator that they lift up to reach the top of the red steps, and he sees them heft up and then begin loading those crates directly into the Vidala shop. And so what he sees from that is that it looks as though they might be fortifying the shop, as though they anticipate that the Crest are going to take action against the Vidala businesses. And I think he sees that they're essentially turning as well as they can, without it being super obvious, the shop into a defended point. There are definitely fell swords around, and they seem to be taking time and effort to make the shop as secure as possible. So that's one interesting thing that he sees. Does he see anything else interesting over the course of like the rest of the evening as he's watching this? Let's ask the fate chart again. I think it is 50-50. 22 with a chaos rank of 7 is a yes. So yes, he does see something else interesting. But before we figure out what that interesting thing is, I have been remiss over the last several episodes in forgetting, in the heat of the moment, one of the important things about the Mythic GM emulator and the fate chart rolls is that doubles create a random event. And so when you roll doubles in the course of rolling on the fate chart, you fire off a random event. And since I just got 22 on that fate chart roll, I'm going to go ahead and see what this random event is. So we are going to roll on our event focus table. (31). Introduce a new NPC. Interesting. All right. Let's go ahead and roll on action and subject to see about this NPC. 80. Trust. And 8. Trust enemies. Interesting. Trust enemies. Okay. So Benn is watching as this happens. Whatever this interesting thing is that he sees, let's find out what that is, and then we can tie these two things together. So our action for that is going to be 20, which is truce, and our subject, 40, truce exterior factors, a truce of exterior factors. I think Benn sees, once again, these fell swords unloading materials and basically trying to reinforce the shop. Over the course of the rest of the evening, I think he sees, oddly enough, he sees Admiral Welfren and a number of sort of guards walking around the red steps, and he kind of slips in and starts to follow her a little bit, wondering if there is some connection with the fact that she is here as all of this stuff is beginning to heat up in the city. And it very much appears that she does go to the Vidala shop, and she enters, and Benn is not close enough to hear anything that's going on inside the shop, but he can see through the glass window, and he sees what looks like her shaking her head and gesturing at Alfus as the shopkeeper, the manager of this branch of the Vidala fortune, is seemingly trying to like talk to her, and she just continues shaking her head and waving her hand as if to like cut him off, at which point she turns and walks out. And I think Benn catches the last moment of that, which is she's leaving. Alfus follows her out the shop and says, my lady, please, can't we talk about this more? And she turns and says, no, we will not speak on this ever again. I am done with you and your people. This is over. And then she storms off. As she does so, I think Benn is watching her and her guards leave, and he recognizes one of her guards. And let's go ahead and roll on our handy-dandy Maze Rats random tables for a name. And I'm going to roll on the female names table, and I'm going to roll 2d6, and we'll see what we get. 4 and 5 is Odette. All right, so he sees this Marine following the Admiral off of the red steps, and his eyes narrow a little bit as he recognizes this woman, Odette. He served with her aboard the Asterion. She was about 6 months ahead of him on her tour of duty, her required service, and she returned and left the Asterion after her 3 years were up, and he knew that she was going to apply to the Vexilio War College, but he didn't know or didn't hear what happened to her after that. But he sees her walking beside the Admiral as their party is leaving, and he files that away as a note for the future. So on the one hand, she, meaning Admiral Welfriend, seems to have had some sort of falling out with the Vidala, and also Benn has identified a former friend and fellow sailor who is seemingly part of the Admiral's retinue. So that is very good for Benn. I think in the future, if he comes across Admiral Welfriend again, which it seems likely that he will, and we are going to go ahead, and I think Benn is going to try and determine when Alfus leaves. Now, because we've defined that the fell swords are basically fortifying this position, does Alfus ever leave, or is he forced to kind of stay at the shop and remain on the premises during this troubled time? So let's ask the fate chart. Again, I'm going to say it is 50-50. I could see it going either way. So chaos rank of 7. Here we go. Does Alfus leave the premises at night? 11 is a yes, and in fact, it is an exceptional yes. So not only does he leave, but I think Benn witnesses an instance of the Fellsword sergeant who is assigned to that business trying to convince him to remain, and Alfus is like, no, I must go. I must not be late for dinner. And I think he is very insistent that he leaves on time every night. And this is the sort of thing that Benn observes over the course of 2 or 3 or 4 days as he watches this process of the Fellswords bringing in more gear. And every night, Alfus leaves at the exact same time. Now, I think it's probably later in the evening, but it is early enough that he can still get home and see his family. So I think that is maybe going to be a bit of a challenge for Benn, because it's not like he's leaving at, our equivalent of midnight to go home. It's going to be later in the evening, more of that like 9 or 10 p.m., but still reasonable enough that he'd be able to go home and eat dinner with his family, whatever shape or form that might take. So Benn observes this, and I think it is also because of the state of things and because he is insistent on leaving. I think he is escorted by a group of Fellswords. And let's go ahead and roll a d6 and see how many Fellswords accompany him. 6. 6 Fellswords accompany him. Of course it would be 6. Why couldn't I roll any lower? So Benn observes this for multiple nights in a row, and he quickly determines that if he is truly to do this on his own, there is no way for him to abduct Alfus on his way home or back, because the Fellswords show up at the house and escort him to the shop as well in the mornings. So Benn has determined that there is no way for him to abduct the shopkeeper going to or coming from his home, which means it's going to have to be at the house itself. So Benn very quickly moves over to observing the house. And does Alfus have a family larger than just a spouse? I think it is likely. I think it's likely that he does. 94 is a no. No, he does not. So he does not have a family other than a spouse. And let's roll a d6. 1 to 3 will be a wife. 4 to 6 is a husband. 4. So it's him, Alfus, and his husband living in this small home. It seems as though he makes decent money. Like, it's not tiny, but it's also not a huge house. Again, the Vidala are not the most successful merchants in the city. And so the fact that they have been able to achieve what they have is somewhat strange. So Benn spends some time observing the sort of nightly ritual of Alfus making his way to his house, being escorted by a half dozen Fellswords, and then he stays at home, and Alfus and his husband have dinner in the evening. They spend some time together and then go to bed. So Benn has to make his plan for that evening time. Now, here's probably the most important question of this, which is, does Alfus's husband leave the house before him in the morning? Like, does Alfus's husband have a job that requires him to be out of the house earlier than Alfus does? Is there a window of time where the shopkeeper is at home alone? And I'm going to say it's 50-50 on that. Chaos rank is 7. Here we go. 39. Yes, there is. So I think his tasks in the morning, his profession requires him to be out of the house early, like the 4th or 5th bell. And I think because of that, that's why Alfus is so insistent about being home at that time every night because he knows that his husband is going to have to get up early the next morning and he wants to be able to see him at least, spend some time with him. And there is some very, it's kind of sweet, actually. So Benn observes this, and then he is going to make a plan to abduct Alfus from the house during that time where his husband is out, but before the fell swords arrive to collect him. Now, of course, we've got one more question, which is, are there fell swords that watch the house during the night? And I think it is likely that there are, given the way things are progressing. So cast rank of 7. Here we go. 46. Yes, there are. So how many do we think there are? I'm going to do the D6 again, but this time I'm going to use it as a D3 because I don't think there would be as many people observing the house as there are who are escorting him from one place to the other. So roll the D6. I rolled a 1, which means there's one person watching. So does Benn spot this person? I think this is probably a good place to go ahead and roll study a situation for Benn. So I'm going to roll my 2d6 and I'm going to add +1 for my sly. See if he spots this fell sword observing the house. 10 on the dice +1 for an 11. So on a 10 plus, ask 3 questions. What is my best escape route? Way in, way past? How is one of my adversaries vulnerable to me right now? What am I missing? Who or where is my enemy really? Who's actually pulling the strings here? Who or what here could be a useful opportunity for me? Okay, so first question I think is, how is one of my adversaries vulnerable to me right now? I think Benn sees the fell sword observing and realizes that where he's sitting, he's left himself open to being snuck up on, and there is the potential that Benn could get up behind him, neutralize the fell sword, and then proceed with his plan to abduct Alfus. What is my best escape route? Way in, way past? I think when Alfus's husband leaves the house in the morning, he opens one of the windows, and I think it's probably to let the sun in as it's rising. And there is an easily scalable small wall there that Benn could climb through in order to get inside the house. For the third question, who or what here could be a useful opportunity for me? Is there some sort of cart or something nearby that Benn could use to transport Alfus once he has captured him? I'm gonna say it's 50-50. 69 is a yes. Yes, there is. So I think the house next door, or maybe it's a couple doors down, has a small cart. Maybe it's a wheelbarrow or something like that that is sitting out, and Benn sees it and he realizes that he can knock Alfus unconscious, bundle him up in this, and then hopefully be able to transport it without being seen or suspected by anyone as he's going down the street. So with all that as information for him, let's go ahead and move into our next scene. And I think the chaos factor is going to go down because he's found a way to potentially neutralize the observer. He is going to be able to get to Alfus when he's alone, and that is going to help him achieve this a lot easier. So this is going to be abduct Alfus. So we are going to roll our d10, and we're going to compare it to our fate chart and see what happens. A 4, which is below our chaos factor, and it is an even number, which means it is an interrupt scene. So this is going to preempt this scene. So let's go ahead and roll on our event focus table and see what this random event is about. 41. Move toward a thread. Interesting. So our current threads are discover what the Vidala are planning, abduct Alfus, who runs the Vidala shop on the Red Steps, learn more about the lieutenant, find out how Welfrin is connected to the Vidala, find out what happened between the Admiral and Auxilia of the Drift. All right, so let's go ahead and roll action and theme, see if that triggers on any of those threads. So I got 82, activity, and 43. Activity competition, or activity of the competition. So I think this interrupt scene occurs during the night while Benn is waiting for Alfus's husband to leave. I think he has positioned himself in a place where he can watch the house and observe the fell sword, who is also observing the house. He has managed to make his way close enough to the fellsword that when another comes in the middle of the night to relieve the one on watch, Benn is close enough to hear them speaking. And I think what he hears is he hears more about that outburst between the Admiral and Alfus. And I think what this represents is the one who comes to replace the fellsword on watch says, "You'll never guess what I heard today." And the other one says, "What's that?" "I heard that Admiral found out that the Vidala were trying to move arcane goods into the city, and that they were using her to distract, and she didn't like it all that much." "Oh, really? What does that mean for us?" And I think the other man who's relieving the one on watch kind of shrugs and says, "Well, I think our mission's the same so far. The contract hasn't been broken. But from what I've heard, if the Admiral gets angry enough, the commander may decide to pull up stakes and get out while we still can." He is going to say, "Well, this is a pretty easy job so far." The other guy says, "You weren't part of the attacks. I still have a couple cuts from where one of those crests got in a good knife." And the other man shrugs and says, "Well, it's been pretty quiet so far. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens." And they exchange a couple more words, and then the one goes off, and the new one who comes on watch settles down, and I think we're going to move towards the thread of find out how Welfrin is connected to the Vidala, and we can go ahead and update that to find out if Welfrin hired the fell swords on the Vidala's behalf. So I think there is definitely some connection that ties the fell swords to both the Vidala and the Admiral. And I think Benn files this away for future reference and as something that might be usable to get the fell swords out of the action. In the meantime, though, it is time for him to attempt to abduct Alfus, as Alfus's husband leaves their house. The window is open. Benn is going to move towards the guard and is going to attempt to knock him unconscious. So he is going to move up behind this fellow as he's sitting there watching, and he is going to attempt to basically put the fellsword in a chokehold, knock him unconscious, and then truss him up and leave him there. And to do that, we're going to face duress. I'm not doing engage in combat because I don't think Benn has the intention of actively harming this fellsword, although honestly, he is somewhat conflicted about it because he just overheard that this man was part of the attacks on his fellows, but he also had that moment of realization in the last episode when they were looking at the bodies of the fellswords and Morrow and the other crest who had fallen, and Benn realized that, like, this is the life that he signed up for. He could be killed at any time on any day, and this mercenary, this fellsword, signed up for the same thing. And also, because of that, there's a kinship there that even though they fought and were at odds at one time, they are basically the same. So I think it's going to be face duress as he tries to knock this fellsword unconscious. This is going to be plus steady. I'm going to roll my 2d6, and we're going to find out what happens. 7 on the dice plus 2 is a 9. So that is a mixed success. You have flinched, stalled, or hesitated. MC will pick one or two of the following and tell you what it will look like if you take it. So you can achieve your goal, but it'll come at a price. You can achieve your goal, but only partially. You cannot achieve your goal, but you can do something similar instead. I feel like the you cannot achieve your goal, but can do something similar instead is that he doesn't have an angle to get a good chokehold on him, but he can knife him instead. And I don't know if I want to go that way or if I want to go, you can achieve your goal, but it comes at a price. So I'm going to go ahead and roll a d6. On a 1, 2, or 3, it's going to be achieve your goal, but at a price. On a 4, 5, or 6, it's you cannot achieve your goal, but can do something similar instead. And it's going to be he knifes him in the side. Here we go. It's a 4. So Benn creeps up behind this fellsword, and he is looking for an angle to get up behind him and force him into a chokehold. But the man is just shifting a little bit, and it's just not the right angle. He knows that if he tries to do it, there's the chance that this fellsword is going to be able to resist him, is going to be able to fight him, and there's a chance that Benn will be discovered. So he looks at the house. He looks at the open window. It's just before the 5th bell, and the city is already starting to stir. If he doesn't act quickly, he's going to lose this opportunity. So Benn takes a breath, thinks about the crest and the things that have to be done in order to achieve and fulfill the contract. He draws out a dagger. He creeps a little bit closer. He laces his hand around the man's mouth and brings the dagger up in a swift and steady, precise shot. The fellsword jerks a little bit as the blade strikes true, and then he goes limp. Benn sort of pushes him back up against the wall, cleans his blade, takes a shaky breath, and then crosses the street towards the house. He is going to attempt to abduct Alfus. Now, as the Black Hood, he has a special move called Their Eyes Never Open. Once per session, when you attempt to silently abduct or kill an NPC who is reasonably within your ability to reach, roll plus steady. So I'm going to take 2d6, and I'm going to roll plus 2, and we are going to see how this goes. 5 on the dice plus 2 is a 7. So on a 7 and 9, I get to choose 1. My options are, it is clean and quiet, no one sees or hears a thing. It goes exactly as planned, your target is killed, abducted exactly as you want. You didn't leave anything behind, or you leave behind a calling card. I can only choose 1. So I think Benn creeps through the window and he sees Alfus, who is still laying in bed. I think his routine is that he wakes up in the morning before his husband leaves, says goodbye, and then goes back to sleep because he still has a few bells before he needs to be collected by the Fell Swords. As he is laying there quietly sleeping, he's dozing, I think. And Benn is going to creep forward and he is going to attempt to grab a hold of the shopkeeper, and he probably has some sort of alchemical formula or, whatever the equivalent of chloroform would be in this world that he's brought with him. He's going to attempt to press this cloth full of this liquid into Alfus's face and keep him from waking up and causing any stir. So I think the one that I'm going to choose is that it is clean and quiet. No one sees or hears a thing. So he reaches forward, he presses it into Alfus's face. The man begins to struggle a little bit, but Benn is strong enough that he can hold him down as the drug takes effect. And Benn pulls his hand away. Alfus is limp and unconscious, and he begins to pull him out of bed and heft him over his shoulder. Now, I think that if I had gotten a complete success and I could have chosen a second one, I could have made it so that I didn't need to make any additional rolls in order to get out of here. So we know that no one sees or hears a thing. It's quiet, it's clean, but Benn still has to get out of there with him. And I think doing that is going to leave the potential that he messes something up, leaves something behind, creates some issue for himself in the future. So I'm going to face duress as he tries to carry the unconscious form of the shopkeeper Alfus out the door and towards that cart that he found. And we are going to roll 2d6 and add plus 2. Let's see what happens. 9 plus 2 is 11, which is a complete success. You achieved what you set out to do. So I think Benn leaves the house. He's carrying Alfus over his shoulder. He kind of looks one way, looks the other way. There's no one on the street. There's no visible sign that anybody is watching. He carries him out to the wheelbarrow. He piles him into it and then covers him with a blanket so that it looks like he's just carting around some pile of something. And he lifts the wheelbarrow and begins to roll it down the street. as the sun begins to rise. Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures, and thanks so much to Syrinscape for the lovely ambient sounds and music throughout the episode. If you enjoyed the show, please tell anyone and everyone in your life about it. And if you haven't already, please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app. It really does help others find me. If you want to interact with me, my handle on Instagram and Twitter is @ErrantSoloPod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.